Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, your Equinox News Recap Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hope. I'm the Managing Executive Editor of the Equinox.
And I'm Chloe Erno, the news editor.
And this is our first episode back. We didn't have an episode last week due to Thanksgiving break, so I hope everyone who's listening or tuning in had a great break and a wonderful holiday, and that we can get through this final sprint, these last 2 weeks here before the semester concludes. But we did have a paper come out, our first paper back, so December 4th. And the top story in news for that paper was about the flag raising ceremony, which was an event that was held before break, which is an annual tradition at Keene where there's a flag room in the student center where a bunch of flags of different countries hang, and these flags are put up, new ones are put up every year at this event where international students or students with some kind of heritage like connection to a country get to present their flag and then have it raised and put up into the upper part of that room there. And it's a nice little event which kind of showcases the diversity of the student body. So, you know, if you walk past the flag room and you see all the different flags, you could see that there's people from all sorts of different, not only just countries, but just, you know, continents, and, you know, like people come from so far away to come here and get their education. And it's really sort of, you know, touching and inspiring also to hear some of the stories that people have to present when it comes to the experience of being an international student or how their heritage has impacted their life. So it's a really nice little event that sort of showcases some positive things to reflect on when it comes to the student body at Keene State.
Yeah, and I think it's so wonderful to see appreciation for international students here on campus. I know that it's been really rough lately with everything that's been happening. We're seeing proposals for 4-year caps on international visas, and I know that's definitely a very difficult time to go to different countries and study. But I think it's just wonderful to see them honored like this and to see them be able to speak on their own experiences here. And it was just really great. And I love seeing our staffer, Sue, there as well.
Yeah, that's true. We have our staffer Sue works with us when it comes to our social media content. He's made a couple of videos for us as well, and so she presented the flag of Vietnam, where she's from. So that was really nice to see. And she also has an opinion piece in this paper that sort of goes over some of that experience of being an international student. So I encourage anyone tuning in to also take a look at that because it was really nice to get that perspective, I think. But I did also want to mention, in terms of some of our other news coverage, a big aspect of what has been happening, what we've talked about in previous episodes, are the faculty separation incentive packages, where basically the administration of Keene State is trying to close the budget gap, which came down from the state budget cut to the university system. In order to do that, they rolled out a plan where they wanted to get a certain amount of faculty to take these voluntary packages where they can leave the institution, whether it be at the end of the semester or the end of the year, and they get, you know, some amount of their pay up until like a certain point, and then that leads it so that they can get a new job elsewhere, while still having enough to get by, basically. But with that, you know, we did get this first big piece of news and sort of getting that information out there about some names that we were able to confirm of faculty who did take the faculty separation package. And so our administrative executive editor, Tim, did this reporting. And it was, you know, it's really difficult to do anything, you know, in this realm when it comes to matters like this. Obviously, it's very private, and we wouldn't publish, and we didn't publish anything that we couldn't double check and double confirm to make sure that, you know, this is true and factual, and that, you know, it's just in the public interest to know who in your department, if you're a student that's currently here, you know, who took the package. You know, are they going to be able to have an adjunct or someone else teach the course that they would have taught if they're leaving at the end of the semester, which many of the people who took these packages are leaving at the end of the semester. Some of them are coming back next semester on like an adjunct basis or like an emeritus basis. But, you know, this is the first big piece of reporting that's coming out now from us about what departments are most affected. And another big aspect of this is sort of talking about how President Don Burks has really sort of harshened the approach from the perspective of the sources that Tim talked to for this piece. How Burks has sort of shied away from the language and rhetoric that former President Treadwell was using when it came to we are seeking to backfill a certain amount of these positions. So hire new people into these, people who are leaving. Now that's kind of uncertain. We don't know for a fact how many people are going to get their positions backfilled. Some of these are from prominent programs such as business where they have multiple faculty members leaving. So um, it's definitely difficult. It's difficult to report on. It's difficult to talk about and see, but it is a very important piece, I think. And there has been a lot of people who are in the dark about it. If you don't have these professors in class, there's chances are you probably wouldn't know um, the fact that they took a separation package. But yeah, just this is the first piece of many to come when it comes to our coverage of the faculty separations, but also the staff reductions.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think the word difficult is a very good way to describe the situation because there's a lot of complexities to what's happening here. And I've felt the loss in the honors program with the loss of Philip Barker, who's leaving. And I think that was the first real big shock for me through all of this was seeing someone who I know and who's a part of my program and a major part of my program departing like that. And it's just very sad to see everyone leave. And we all know it's a very difficult situation to work through, but it is disheartening to see that these changes are being made in a way that isn't really corresponding with what Treadwell said before. And it's a very sad situation.
I think they're just, I don't know. I also am a political science minor, so I definitely will feel the loss when it comes to Dr. Barker. But I feel like it gets to a point where I feel like if you asked any of these faculty members individually, maybe some of them were somewhat close to retirement anyway, and they just felt like this was a good way out, or they had plans already set in place. But then I feel like if you asked a lot of them, they probably would say the main reason that they would have wanted to stay, if they did want to stay, would have been the students. But due to the climate surrounding Keene State, USNH, higher ed, there's a lot of just constant uncertainty, and there's not that feeling of like your job is going to continue to be needed basically in the eyes of the state. So there's a lot of concerns about that, and it's sort of this just continuous fight for trying to get that support for higher ed, and then not receiving it, time and time again, and then not feeling like you are appreciated maybe by those outside of just your colleagues or your students. It's a really difficult position to be put in, and I think it's nothing against anyone who did take the packages. It's just sort of an unfortunate reality of where we're at, but I did just want to mention it because it is, a lot of people are going to wonder about it and ask about it. So I encourage anyone tuning in to check out that article to read more about some of the people that will be departing and some of the news surrounding how President Burks is approaching this. But with that being said, let's get into the top story in region and state, which is coming from Abigail Ham from the Keene Sentinel. This is sort of more of an informational piece about safe driving tips when it comes to winter driving. It's always a wonderful thing in New England that we have so much snow and ice and black ice and various things that make it very difficult to get around in this very car-centric country. So I'm a commuter student, so I drive back and forth a lot. I just drove back and forth. We put together the paper on Tuesday, which was the snow day for Keene State. It was a little bit rough getting back. A lot of snow to clear off, but yeah, this piece sort of talks about just making sure that you have tires that are suitable, when it comes to like winter tires, or that you have, any seasons that are up to par when it comes to being able to drive in the snow. Um, Talking about sort of the myth around like, oh, you have like a two-wheel drive versus a four-wheel drive. One of them can stop faster or better. That's not really exactly true. when it comes to driving in the ice. There's just, it's dangerous all around. So, the common advice will always just be like to be slower than you usually would be even more attentive than you would be, and just keep mind of all your surroundings on the road here because it can get pretty crazy. And unfortunately, there are a lot of accidents, especially with like the influx of travel during the holiday season in particular. We just had a big bout of travel with Thanksgiving. We're going to have another one when it comes to the upcoming, winter holidays here. So I thought it was an important piece to talk about sort of the informational side of what you can do to be safer on the roads.
Yeah, and I live on campus, so I don't know what it's like to be a commuter, but I also live 2.5 hours away in Connecticut. So I know that it's been a bit of a difficult drive back and forth to go home over the breaks. And both in weather conditions, rain or snow, it's always something to take into consideration. And I think in Keene, it's just we get a lot of snow and we get a lot of bad weather. And it's important that students remain safe, whether or not they're walking on campus or they're driving or they're just riding a bike. It's important to keep that in mind and to keep themselves safe while they're driving out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can sort of move on now into our student life top story here, which was another pre Thanksgiving break event with Red and White Night, which is the annual celebration for graduating seniors held by the senior class government. So I'm a senior, and so I was partaking in that event myself, just personally, not as a reporter or anything. And I thought it was a pretty good time. I mean, everyone sort of, as the name implies, you dress up in red or white or both. And it was held in the dining commons, but there was a really nice like charcuterie like spread. There was like all these different like cake pops and like cupcakes and various like dessert things. And then they did have on the upstairs, they had like sort of like a bar, quote unquote, which was sort of like canned drinks. But, it's not something you see every day when it comes to like campus sponsored events. So I thought it was like a nice little thing, like a send off. They had music from WKNH, and so we know the folks from there pretty well. And so that was cool too. It was all request based. But yeah, I had a pretty good time myself, and I think it's nice to be able to sort of give people the opportunity. There's not many events like this where there's like, when you get to college, it's not really as like class centric when it comes to like first year class. Like you're not like in like a cohesive community, it doesn't feel like. So events like this that are sort of like particularly focused and trying to like give people in one class an opportunity to again like, in this case like reflect on your college career and stuff. I thought it was a nice little thing to do, especially for some of the people I know. My senior, like my high school senior activities, they still happened, but there was sort of like some restrictions and like things from like the remainder of COVID that kind of impacted that a little bit. So it's really like this event is like a nice little like not like prom esque thing, but it's sort of like in that vein where you get that good feeling of just being in community and sort of like it's like a send off, even though it's kind of like early to do that. But it was nice.
Yeah, and I wasn't at the event, but one of my friends was DJing there, and according to him, he had a really great time at the event. And I'm looking forward to it as a sophomore. I still have 2 more years, but I'm looking forward to the event myself, and I get to experience it. And I'm happy for all the seniors that had a good time that night.
Yeah, definitely, and some really good photos from our staffer Amanda as well, who is kind of like a dark room, not like the total best lighting ever, but she was able to pull it off pretty well, and there was a nice little we were utilizing those photos in the layout definitely, or Justin was, so that came out really well. Um, with that, let's move on to our editorial now. This week was about sort of not really a localized issue, but definitely a higher ed issue. So this is talking about the Oklahoma University situation, which, if you're not familiar, a student who was a junior or is a junior psychology major at Oklahoma University was in this psychology class, and there was an assignment that was basically do this reading and then respond with a 650 word essay, basically, that gives your reaction to the reading, but use cited sources, use empirical evidence, cite the article itself, kind of like a standard thing that you would see in college. It's a really standard assignment. Do this reading and then react to it. But this student in particular, Samantha Fulnecki, I believe is her name. Her response paper didn't use cited sources, and it was very sort of inflammatory. It was from like a religious conservative viewpoint. That's not like the issue with it. It's mainly sort of in like the beginning sentence, for instance, she says that like people teasing to like enforce gender norms is like good in her opinion, and then later on she contradicts herself and says that gender like roles aren't really like a thing, that's just how people act. And then at another point she says that women want to act womanly and they have because they are born with womanly desires in their heart or something like that. She also does sort of basically refer to people in the trans community as demonic, and then also does sort of talk about her classmates' responses to this prompt, and sort of doesn't call them stupid, but does say that they are kind of being sheep and don't want to get their toes stepped on, and they're just too afraid to say what she's saying. So it very much references God in the Bible, but it doesn't exactly cite anything like any specific verses. It doesn't cite any like theological analysis or anything scholarly, nor does it cite the actual article. So she got a 0 for the assignment, and it's posted on Turning Point USA. The whole response from the professor and the teaching assistant, and the rubric as well. And the professor's response was pretty nice. In the response, the professor said, it's okay to have these, viewpoints when it comes to thinking gender roles or gender norms. Those are good things. If you think that, then that's fine. But this is a scientific class. It's a psychology class. So you have to sort of back up what you're saying. And that's the main issue. And you didn't follow the rubric and you didn't follow what the prompt was. So that's why you got a 0 on the assignment. But Turning Point USA made a big sort of deal about this on social media, and there was a lot of backlash. But there was a lot of people that were saying that, even from the more conservative side or the more like religious end, people in academia who were saying, this probably wouldn't have gotten a good grade in my class either because it just doesn't do what it's supposed to do in terms of being like an academic paper. So as a result of this, Oklahoma University sort of complied with some of the demands from Turning Point and those on the right, and they put the TA on administrative leave, and then they swapped out the professor. So the professor's no longer teaching that course. They have a different professor, and they are also going through a grade appeal process for the assignment and looking into religious discrimination as claimed by Samantha Fulnecki. With all that being said, basically in this editorial we're talking about more generally just the pressures now put on higher ed to we're seeing colleges not uphold academic standards and sort of more often bow to political pressure and demands even when they are at times unreasonable. And sort of if we're worried at all if that could happen at Keene State potentially, there's sort of some concerns that we were voicing about the university system level with like other instances of the college sort of bowing to like state orders when it comes to the DEI law, the anti-DEI law, and then things of that nature. Like, are we confident that Keene State would side with a professor and try to make sure that they feel somewhat protected and upheld by their institution, or do we think that they would sort of kowtow to more of like the political pressure? And so we were talking about our concerns with that in this editorial.
And I think this situation is just really ridiculous because we read the actual essay during our meeting, we read the rubric, and it just wasn't a well written piece at all. Um, you can't expect to get a good grade on an essay that asks for empirical evidence and just state your opinion the entire time. You can use the Bible as a source, but you need to cite actual passages and not just say from the Bible again and again and again. And it's just insane to me how Turning Point is involved now. And the religious discrimination part of it when she literally called trans people demonic. You think that that would be the actual discrimination in the lawsuit, but it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I think we raise a very valid point about whether or not this could happen at Keene and if the institution would bow to those pressures to just conform to what people want them to do when they aren't even doing the actual work. It's just your opinion, and the opinion in question is horribly offensive as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I sort of brought up the point during the discussion. It's like, what separates a college just from like a sort of glorified real estate portfolio with like, is this more of like a business for them, or is it about the actual mission of what a college is supposed to do? Because if you're not upholding these like baseline academic standards, you're not letting professors sort of do their job with like enforcing grading in a proper way, which this was, graded properly. It's not like there was any harsh response from this professor. It was very cordial. And so, there's some concern, I think, from my end where I'm wondering, like, was this sort of trying to, like, provoke this, like, reaction? Because, Turning Point got a hold of this pretty quickly. Um, and at least, the most recent developments is I know that the student in question, Samantha, she had posted something on social media about how she wasn't even fully happy with the university's statement, sort of mostly complying with the demands. And that's like, sort of gets back at what we've discussed before, where, are these people ever really going to be happy with anything you do? I mean, not really. I mean, you're sort of trying to bend to the will of people who don't agree with the mission of higher ed and don't really want to see it exist, at least not anywhere close to where it is in its form. So that's definitely my top concern is just, what is there really to gain out of sort of bowing to the pressure of, in this case, literally a private company, not even the government.
Yeah, and it's insane to me. It's literally insane everything that's happening with that. The fact that Turning Point is involved, and I don't think it would go that far at Keene. I can't see a situation where Turning Point would get involved in anything that happens, but I can see an instance where the institution might feel the need to bow down to a situation similar to this. And I think it's just that political pressure, especially in the wake of everything that's happened in the last few months. Charlie Kirk's death definitely ignited a very strong right wing wave over college campuses with everything that happened. And I do think that we have a right to be worried and question whether or not this could happen here and making a stand if it does try and happen here.
Yeah, I think definitely the main reason why it might not is simply just because we're too small for anyone to really care that much, which isn't really like a good or bad thing. It's just like a fact of the matter. And so, I would hope, regardless, if it was to come down to it, that Keene State or, more broadly USNH would sort of stand with professors and uphold those academic standards. Because, without that, do you really have a college, or at least what a college is supposed to be? So that's sort of what we said in that. But moving on now to arts and entertainment, we had some more coverage of some pre-Thanksgiving break happenings. So this was showings of the most recent production from the theater and dance department, Bridges of Madison County. So this was based on this. There's previous works, of this musical, but it's a story about an Italian American housewife and her 4-day affair with this National Geographic photographer, as far as I understand it. And so this, production was a very lively, and they really, go they kind of go crazy when it comes to like the costuming and like the props and like the designs and stuff. When I look at like the photos, we had some really strong photos taken during the dress rehearsal by our photo editor Xander, and a really cool layout thing that arts and entertainment editor Haley did, where sort of the headline says the bridges of, and it's like curved text, and then it says of, Madison County. Um, but it's really nice to sort of hear the reaction of audience members and the director and actors and actresses in this production to sort of talk about what it means to them. There are some like familiar faces when it comes to Kai, who I know has been like involved in that for his entire time at Keene State, and he's been prominently featured in a bunch of different productions, and I always see him come up on those different articles and layouts. But now we're sort of it's his senior year, so it's sort of looking at like this is one of like the last things we'll do, and so it's interesting to see people mature in their different departments, and then sort of people who have been such like cornerstones of different things sort of reach one of their final performances. Um, but yeah, it was a really nice, just visually, really nice article. It wasn't too like it's a nice read. You just get a feeling from the different people that came out to see it and sort of their thoughts about it. And there was some cool like technical stage stuff, and they had like a rotating stage thing that I don't think they ever had before. So yeah, just all around really exciting stuff from Tad on this.
I think it's so fun to see the theater department just kind of pop off like that in terms of set design, costumes, everything. And I think just the plot in general kind of allows that. It's a bit more on the crazier side, it's a bit more out there for Keen. And I think it's fun that they just kind of took that, rolled with it, and just put everything they had into the production.
Yeah, it seems like they have a really good community over there. Just on like a colleague level, I know it talks about one of the people in the production who like suffered like a spinal injury, and then sort of what that was like going through like recovery, going through that, and just being like supported by the rest of the cast. So that's like another really interesting detail, and it's nice to see people just looking out for each other. So yeah, it was a really nice glimpse into what that was like, and really cool production. But with that, we can move on to our sports top story, which is some coverage of the women's basketball team and sort of their success so far this year. This was an article by our staffer Frank, so great work from him. But it's sort of something that our sports editor had been noticing when you look at the results so far from the usually more talked about and more prominent men's basketball team, and sort of how they've been a little bit on and off in terms of winning, then losing, then sort of losing for a little bit and then winning again. And so the success hasn't been as consistent for them as previous years, unfortunately. But when it comes to the women's basketball team, there has been a really nice string of wins on their side, and that's sort of anchored by their captain, Bryn Raudiola, and Val Louisi, who I know are the two sort of big names on that team and have really sort of just broken out in terms of prominence and popularity. They got plenty of weekly honors in the past from the Little East Conference, as well as just being recognized for all their contributions to this team. And it's nice, I think, to sort of get coverage of teams again that aren't maybe as commonly thought of. Again, oftentimes the men's basketball team is rightfully so centered when it comes to they've performed very well, but now we're looking at it where the women's basketball team is doing really well, and so they deserve that level of respect and coverage as well as any other team. So I was glad we were able to highlight that and able to get photos of the whole team and as well as just at their practice. So it's really nice to get those insights into what the team culture is like and sort of what contributes to that success.
And I love to see them doing so well, but I also love to see women's sports teams just gain the acknowledgments that they deserve. I think it's great to shine attention to them, both as a former sports player and as someone who has a lot of friends who play in sports. I think it's just great that they're getting the acknowledgement because they don't always get that, as you were speaking of. And it's just nice to see them getting the spotlight.
Yeah. So with that, that's the conclusion of our recap. So as always, I would like to extend a special thank you to Equinox alum Zach Keenan for composing the music for Noxcast, as well as the creator of the Noxcast graphic, our very own art director, Elijah Fisher, and the editor of Noxcast, our multimedia director, Noelle Hisgen. Until next week, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you for one more recap, and then we're done for the semester. Thanks for watching.